I had read the contract twice before the Duke of Ensley entered the room, and by the time he did, I had already struck out the 7th clause with the secretary's pen. He stopped just inside the library door. A tall man, dark-coated, with the kind of stillness that costs other people effort and seemed to cost him nothing. He looked at the pen in my hand, then at the page, then at me, as though I were a piece of furniture that had spoken. "You have marked my agreement," he said. "I have corrected it, Your Grace." I did not rise the way a woman in my position was supposed to rise. I had decided, on the walk from the hired hack to his door, that I would not flinch in this house. Clause 7 binds me to silence on pain of forfeiting the settlement, but does not bind you to pay it if you end the arrangement early. You could dismiss me in October and owe me nothing, and I could not say a word. I have struck the second half. You will pay whether you end this in June or at Michaelmas. Beneath the table, where he could not see, my thumb found the small brass seal I wore on a black ribbon at my wrist, and pressed it once, hard, into my palm. It was the only thing I had carried out of my old life. I pressed it the way other people prayed. The Duke crossed the room. He did not sit. He picked up the page, read my correction, and set it down again. And something moved behind his eyes that I would later learn to read as the precise opposite of displeasure. "Miss Tilney," he said, "I was given to understand you were a quiet, unremarkable woman who needed a position." "I am," I said. "I am only also a careful one." What he did not know, what no one in London knew, was that I had been raised to read documents exactly like this one, across a wide oak desk in a house called Hartsmere, by a father who told me a lady who could not read a contract was a lady someone else would write. My father had been dead 6 years. The house was gone. The name was gone. But the hand he trained had just struck out clause 7 in a duke's library, because I was tired of pretending I did not know how. The Duke of Ensley sat down at last. "Tell me why a woman who negotiates like a solicitor's clerk is willing to marry a man she has never met and be set aside in 5 months for £5,000. "Because £5,000 is a great deal of money to a woman with nothing," I said. Which was true, and because the arrangement requires me to disappear afterward. Which suits me, which was also true, in a way he could not begin to guess. He watched me a moment longer, then said, "We will be married Thursday. My sister's future depends on it, and I do not intend to lose it to a stranger's nerves." "Do you have nerves, Miss Tilney?" "None that signify, Your Grace." "Good." He stood. "Then learn to call me Adrian when there are servants in the room, and Your Grace when there are guests, and we shall manage." I should have felt fear. Instead, I felt the floor of Hartsmere under my feet again, the way a person feels a phantom limb. I had walked into the house of the most powerful man I had ever met, and for the first time in 6 years, I had not been afraid of a single thing in the room. That should have warned me. A woman who is not afraid has usually not yet seen the danger. We were married on Thursday, by special license in a cold church off Hanover Square, with 2 witnesses and no flowers. When the clerk pushed the register toward me, my hand went, by an instinct older than thought, toward the seal at my wrist, as though I might press it into the wax beside my name, the way a daughter of the House of Aldous had been taught to seal what she meant. I caught myself with the pen already wet. There was no wax. There was no House of Aldous. I wrote Rose Tilney in a plain, careful hand, and the Duke beside me had married a woman who did not exist. He did not kiss me. He took my hand to help me to the carriage, and I felt against my fingers a roughness along the inside of his left wrist, an old burn, healed badly, that his cuff usually hid. He drew his hand back, as if I had touched a wound still open. "You will want to know about the house before you stand in it," he said. And that was the whole of our wedding. Ensley House on Grosvenor Square had swallowed quieter women than I pretended to be. The Duke walked me through it the way a general walks ground he means to defend. The gold drawing room where his mother received, the long gallery of Ensley dukes who had all, apparently, looked exactly this displeased. The breakfast room where I would learn the names of 200 people I must greet by Friday. His sister found us in the gallery. Lady Diana Ensley was 19. With her brother's dark colouring and none of his stillness, she came down the room at a near run and stopped a yard from me with the frank, dangerous curiosity of a clever girl told to be grateful who has decided not to be. "So you are the bride," she said. "Adrian, she is not at all what you described. You said quiet." "She is quiet," the Duke said. "She is watching the room like a woman counting the exits," Diana said. "I like her. Are you really being paid?" "Adrian won't tell me anything. Only that I must call you sister and mean it." She tilted her head. "He is marrying so that I have my £20,000 and a season and a chance at a life he didn't get. So now you know what he's spent on you, and that it isn't really for you at all." "Diana," the Duke said, and his voice did a thing I had not heard it do. It cracked, very slightly, on his sister's name, the way a frozen branch cracks before it gives. It was a small thing, but I had spent 6 years learning to read men who hid what they wanted, because the man who ruined me had hidden it perfectly. And I knew the sound of a person who had decided love was a debt he must pay quietly, so no one could call it in. I looked at the Duke of Ensley, the burn he hid, the sister he would not name his sacrifice aloud, and saw that he was not a cold man. He was a man taught that warmth was a tax others collected, who had resolved to pay it where it could not be seen. "You needn't worry, Lady Diana," I said. "I'll mean it." And I did mean it, which was the first thing in the whole arrangement I had not planned. The Ensley Trust that held her £20,000, and the secondary estates, and the whole apparatus of the late Duke's will, was administered by a man of business who would call on Friday to satisfy himself the marriage was real before he certified it and released the funds. I did not think to ask his name. That was my single error, and I made it because I was happy, and happiness had made me careless, and I had sworn on my father's grave never to be careless again. The man arrived at 3. I came down the great stair in dove grey silk, and the butler announced, "Mr. Bramwell, Your Grace," and I walked in and looked at the man rising from the Duke's best chair, and the floor of Ensley House tilted under me like the deck of a ship. I knew that face. I had last seen it across my father's deathbed. Josiah Bramwell had administered the estate of Baron Aldous of Hertsmere. He had stood at the foot of my father's bed, with a black portfolio under his arm, and 3 weeks after the funeral produced a will, leaving Hertsmere and £45,000 to a distant claimant and a school in the north, and leaving me £100 and a recommendation to a clergyman's family who wanted a companion. I had been 18, and I had wept, and I had not understood, because the will was sealed and witnessed, and a man of business does not lie, everyone said. He did not know me. 6 years, a different name, dove grey silk, a duchess's poise. He saw exactly what the Duke had hired. He bowed. "Your Grace." "I am honoured. I have served the Ensley interest these 4 years, and it is a particular pleasure to see His Grace so happily settled. 4 years. He had ruined me, pocketed my £45,000, and bought his way into a duke's affairs with the proceeds of my erasure, risen into the very house I had married into. I had walked into a stranger's marriage to disappear, and walked straight to the foot of the only man in England I had reason to destroy. "Mr. Bramwell," I said. My voice did not shake. I had spent 6 years teaching it not to. "The pleasure is mine." I sat. I poured tea. I asked after his journey. And under the table, where no one could see, I pressed the brass seal at my wrist into my palm, until it left a mark, because that seal was the matrix of the House of Aldous, and somewhere in England there was a will it had been pressed into in red wax. The true one. The one my father had given our rector the night before he died, when his eyes had finally opened to the man at the foot of his bed. I had kept the seal 6 years because it was all I had of him. I understood now I had kept it because it was a key, and I had finally been handed the standing to turn it. A ruined girl is not believed, a duchess is. Mr. Bramwell certified the marriage. He told me I was a great asset to the family, and I smiled at him across my dead father's stolen money, and began, that afternoon, to plan how I would take it back. I wrote to the Reverend Pollard at Hartsmere that night, in my own hand, sealed plain, asking whether he still held the packet my father had entrusted to him in the spring of 1811, and telling him, for the first time in 6 years, where Rosalind Aldous might be found. The season did not wait for my reckoning. It swallowed us, and the Duke and I went into it side by side, and I discovered that I was very, very good at being his wife. I do not say it to boast. I say it because it became the thing that nearly destroyed us. I knew which dowager could be won by being asked her opinion of the regent's taste. How to enter a ballroom on a duke's arm so the room arranged itself around us. I had been bred for exactly this, and then forbidden it, and now it came back through my hands like water through a broken dam. And Adrian watched me do it with a baffled attention I felt on my skin like heat. "You were not a companion," he said one night in the carriage, after I had turned a hostile dinner table into an hour of laughter and saved an alliance he needed. "A companion learns to be invisible. You make a room look at you and thank you for it." "Where did you learn it?" "From watching my betters," I said. "You have no betters," he said, then looked as startled by the sentence as I was, and turned to the window, and neither of us spoke for the length of 3 streets. That was the first crack in him, and I made it, and I had not meant to. I had meant to use this house and slip out of it in October, with my fortune restored and the man who stole it broken behind me. I had not meant to make the Duke of Ensley look at me as though I were a window he had walked past every day and only now noticed had a garden behind it. At the Hartwell ball that week I found him standing apart, as he always did, a glass untouched in his hand, his thumb moving slowly around its rim, as though polishing a thought too sharp to hold. "You are watching me," he said when I reached him. He did not turn his head. "You are easy to watch. You stand at the edge of every room you own." "It is the only place I can see all the exits," he said, my own thought, my own habit, given back in his voice, and I understood that he was as braced against this world as I was, the difference being that he had been taught to call his fear dignity, and I had been taught to call mine survival. "Adrian," I said, and it was the first time I used his name when no one was near enough to require it. "You don't have to stand guard tonight. I'll watch the exits. You may, for 1 hour, simply be in the room." He looked at me then, and whatever was in his face, it was not cold, and it was not a duke's. And across the bright noise of the ball, I felt the air go out of the space between us as though a door had opened onto a height. Mr. Bramwell was watching us from beside the card room. I felt his eyes the way you feel a draft. When Adrian was called to the Marquise, Bramwell crossed to me with the smooth, regretful gait of a man bringing bad news he means to enjoy. "Your Grace, forgive an old servant of the family a moment's candor. There is a whisper that the marriage was arranged in haste, and the bride's origins are not what the family would wish. I have certified the union, of course, but a trustee may always reconsider whether the spirit of the late Duke's will has been honored. Lady Diana's portion is not yet paid out. These things take time. It would grieve me to see the family troubled by questions about who, precisely, the Duchess is." He smiled at me with my father's money in his teeth, and he did not know me, and he was threatening to destroy me with the very identity I was hiding, and the irony of it was so total, I nearly laughed. "How thoughtful of you to worry, Mr. Bramwell," I said. "I am sure the Duchess can survive a great deal of curiosity about who she is." But I went home that night and understood his game, because it was the game he had played on a frightened girl of 18. Make my origins a danger to the people I had come to love, and offer the Duke a quiet way to be rid of me before the question spread, with Diana's £20,000 the knife at Adrian's throat. He did not need to know I was Rosalind Aldous. He only needed me gone before I discovered I had the power to be her again. The Reverend Pollard's reply came on a Tuesday. He had wept, he wrote, to know I lived. He held the packet still, my father's true will, signed and sealed with the Aldous seal in his own hand, naming me sole heir to Hertsmere and all the funds, executed the night before he died, and given to the church, because by then my father no longer trusted his own man of business. The will Bramwell had proved in court was a fabrication. Pollard would bring the true one to London himself, and begged only that I be careful, for a man who had forged a baron's will would not stop at one more crime to keep it. I held that letter and understood I had, at last, everything I had wanted for 6 years. The proof, the name, the means to unmake Josiah Bramwell in front of the world. I could be Lady Rosalind Aldous again. I could leave this arrangement in October as planned, restored and rich, and I sat in the Duchess's morning room and did not feel triumphant. I felt the seal at my wrist, and across the corridor I could hear Adrian teaching Diana some absurd card trick and failing, the two of them laughing the unguarded laugh he never let strangers hear. And I realized the trap I had walked into to escape my old life had become the only life I wished to keep. Adrian came to find me before the Allenby route, because Diana had insisted I wear the Ensley sapphires, and he had come to fasten them himself, rather than send a maid. And I let him, because his hands at the back of my neck were the gentlest thing that had touched me in 6 years. His fingers found the black ribbon at my wrist, where my glove had slipped. "You always wear this," he said, "even tonight. What is it?" I could have lied. I had lied to him about everything else. But his thumb was moving over the worn brass the way it moved over the rim of a glass, with that careful, hungry attention, and I was so tired of being no one. "It is a seal," I said. "My father's, the only thing I kept of him. He used to let me press it into the wax when I was small, and tell me that to seal a thing was to say I stand behind this. He died believing he had nothing left to leave me. He was wrong. He left me this, and it has turned out to be worth more than the house." Adrian went very still. "And the house?" "Gone, taken, by a man who counted on a girl being too young and too frightened to ever take it back. And are you still too frightened?" The space between us had gone to almost nothing. I could feel the warmth of him, the burn scar at his wrist a half-inch from my hand, his breath against my hair, and every rule I had been taught stood between us like a row of candles, and I wanted, more than I had wanted my own name back, to put them all out. "No," I whispered. The door opened, a footman, with the carriage, and the moment shattered like dropped glass, and Adrian stepped back with the particular violence of a man wrenching himself off a ledge, and we went to the Allenby route, with the sapphires cold at my throat, and the thing we had almost said still ringing between us like a struck bell. It was at the Allenby route that Bramwell made his move, and at the Allenby route that I made mine, and the order in which we made them decided everything. He had gone to Adrian. I saw it before I heard it, saw the Duke's face close like a slammed door, saw Bramwell beside him, wearing the gravest, kindest expression of a man performing an unpleasant duty. I crossed the room. "I have never moved faster in silk. Have reason to believe," Bramwell was saying, low, "that the woman is not Rose Tilney at all. The references were forged. I have engaged an inquiry agent. Your Grace, You were deceived into this marriage by an adventuress, and the only way to protect Lady Diana's portion and the family name is to put her aside quietly, now, before it becomes public. The trust will support an annulment. I can make it clean." Adrian turned to me, and in his face I saw the whole of his life. The father who taught him everyone wanted his title and not him. The certainty closing over him like cold water that I, too, had wanted only what he could give. That the warmth had been a performance after all. "Is it true?" he said. "Is your name Rose Tilney?" Here was my escape, handed to me clean. I could deny it, brazen it, and live, or let them put me aside and walk away in October restored and free. Bramwell did not know who I was. If I held my tongue 1 month more, I could destroy him at my leisure and never risk this man knowing I had married him under a lie. I chose Adrian instead. "My name," I said, and lifted the seal at my wrist so the candlelight caught the worn brass, "is Rosalind Aldous. I am the daughter of Baron Aldous of Hertsmer. And the reason I know this man is a liar is that he forged my father's will, stole £45,000 and the house I was born in, and sent me into the world with £100 and a false name to wear. Because a frightened girl of 18 could not call a respectable man of business a thief and be believed." I turned to Adrian. The room had gone silent in a widening ring. "Your Grace, do not look at me as though I have wronged you. I am not the one you wronged, and I did not come here to be rescued. I married you under a false name, because it was the only name the world had left me. But everything you have liked in me, the woman who reads your contracts and watches your exits and means it when she calls Diana sister, that woman is real, and she is the only thing in this arrangement I never once pretended. Now stand aside, Adrian. There is a thing I have waited 6 years to do, and I am going to do it whether you believe me or not. I had burned it down, the safe exit, the secret, all of it. I had said it in front of London. There was no taking it back, and I did not want to, and that was how I knew. What I had not reckoned with was how fast a cornered forger can move. Bramwell did not bluster. He smiled, gently, sorrowfully, to the watching room. "The poor creature is unwell. Your Grace, this is precisely the instability I feared. There was a Baron Aldous, yes, and a daughter who died, in grief, some years past. I have his will. I proved it in Chancery. I keep it still." He spread his hands. "This woman has read of the family somewhere and woven a fantasy. I have a witnessed will under the Baron's own seal. She has a ribbon and a story. I ask all of you, which of us a court will believe?" It was nearly a perfect move. He had the document. I had, in that moment, only my word and a piece of brass, and I watched that terrible reasonable doubt move across the faces of the room. A man of business, a sealed will proved in Chancery, against a bride who had just confessed to a false name. The old water began to close over my head. They were going to do it again. They were going to decide I was no one. And the worst of it landed on Adrian, who stepped back from me, not in cruelty, I understood later, but in shock, and said, low and ruined, "I cannot do this here. Rosalind, or whoever you are, you have made my sister's name a spectacle. Go home, and we will. I cannot do this here," and turned from me in front of London. The distance between us was suddenly the whole length of a marriage I had thrown into the fire for a man who could not, in the one moment it mattered, choose to believe me. I went home alone. I sat up the whole night with the seal pressed into my palm. Bramwell had a sealed will. I had a seal. And somewhere on the North Road, if Pollard had kept his word, a clergyman was carrying the one thing in England that could turn my piece of brass into a blade. He came at noon. The Reverend Pollard, grey and travel-worn, put into my hands a packet wrapped in oilcloth he had carried against his chest the length of the kingdom, and inside it was my father's true will, and at its foot, in red wax gone dark with age, the seal of the House of Aldous. I sent one note to the trust, where Bramwell was that afternoon convening the trustees to void my marriage and freeze Diana's portion on the grounds that the Duke had been deceived, and its copy to the Duke. It said only, "Come to the trust meeting. Bring witnesses. I am not finished." The trust met in the long room at Ensley House, because the late Duke had willed it so. And that was Bramwell's mistake, for it meant I came to that meeting through my own front hall, past the gallery of dead Ensley Dukes, and I came as the mistress of the house, whether or not they had decided I was. Bramwell sat at the head of the table, with the forged will open before him. Adrian stood at the window with his back to the room, and did not turn when I entered, and Diana stood beside him with her chin up and her brother's stillness on her at last, and she looked at me and did not look away, and I loved her for it. "You should not be here," Bramwell said. "We are concluding a sad business." "You are," I agreed, and walked the length of the table and set my father's true will down beside his forged one, the two documents side by side in the cold light. "Gentlemen, there are two wills before you. They cannot both be the last testament of Baron Aldous. One is a forgery, and the man who forged it is in this room, and I am going to show you which. In the time it takes to melt a little wax, I asked the trust's clerk for his candle and a stick of sealing wax. My hand did not shake. I let the wax fall red beside my father's true will, took the brass matrix from the ribbon at my wrist, pressed it in, and lifted it. And there on the table lay an impression identical in every worn nick and flourish to the seal at the foot of the document Pollard had carried 200 miles. Then I turned the forged will toward the candle and pressed the same matrix beside its seal, and the two impressions did not match, could not match, because no forger had ever held the true die. Bramwell's was a copy taken from an impression, soft where mine was sharp, wrong in 3 places a child could see once they were laid together. "The seal that sealed my father's will is the seal in my hand," I said to the silent room, "and it has never left my person since the night he died. The man who forged the other had everything but this. He had the house, and the money, and 4 years of a duke's confidence bought with my inheritance, and he could not buy the one thing my father pressed into my palm when I was small and told me meant I stand behind this." I looked at Josiah Bramwell, and for the first time in 6 years he looked at me and knew me. "You should have made certain the girl was dead, Mr. Bramwell. You only made certain she was quiet. They are not the same thing." The grave men bent over the two impressions, and the eldest, a former judge, looked up at Bramwell with the expression I had waited 6 years to see land on that face, and said, "This is forgery. A hanging matter, or near it. Send for a constable." Bramwell moved for the door, and found Pollard in it, and the footman behind Pollard, because I had stationed them there an hour before, having learned at last that a woman who wants justice had best post her own guards at the exits. And Adrian turned from the window. He crossed the room through all those staring men, as though they were not there, and stopped in front of me, and he was not cold, and he was not a duke, and his voice when it came was wrecked and low and entirely his own. "I turned away from you, in front of London, when you had just done the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do. I could not make myself believe it, because I have never once been chosen by someone who was not paid to do it, and I did not know how. Rosalind, I have spent my whole life at the edge of rooms watching the exits, and you walked into the worst room of your life and bolted every door behind you and stayed. For me, when you had a clean way out, I felt you choose it, and I was too much a coward to choose you back." He took both my hands, the burn scar at his wrist against my fingers. "I am choosing you now. In front of every man here, and the late Duke's lawyers, and God. Not the arrangement. You, the woman who reads my contracts and watches my exits and is the only person alive who ever made me feel seen instead of owned. Stay. Not for 5 months. Stay. You said £5,000, I said, because my eyes had filled and I could not yet manage anything braver, and I struck out clause 7. Strike out all of them, he said. Strike out the whole contract. I never wanted a performance. God help me. I think I knew it the moment you corrected my agreement and pressed that seal at your wrist, and I wanted to know what it was for the rest of my life. And there, in the long room, before the trustees and the constable and the dead dukes on the wall, the Duke of Ensley kissed me. Not the careful press of a duke and his duchess, but the kiss of a man who has finally stopped guarding the door, and I kissed him back with 6 years of silence going out of me all at once. And somewhere behind us Diana said, "Oh, thank heaven," with great feeling, and the former judge said it was most irregular, and I did not care for a single one of them, because for the first time since I was 18, I was standing in a house that knew my name. Josiah Bramwell was tried at the King's Bench that autumn for the forgery of a peer's will and the theft of £45,000. The seal undid him. 2 impressions laid side by side require no eloquence. He was convicted and transported, and the last anyone heard he was keeping ledgers for a penal commissary at the far end of the earth, a finer justice than the rope, a man who stole a fortune ending his days counting another man's shillings and never touching one. Hertsmere came back to me. The true will did the work in a single term. The funds were paid, and Diana had her £20,000 and her season and, by the following spring, a betrothal to a kind, unimpressive young man she adored. The only kind of marriage I would let her make. We went down to Hertsmere in May. I had braced myself, the way I brace for everything, to find it a ruin or a grief. It was neither. It was only a house, smaller than I remembered, with my father's oak desk still in the library and the long lawn going gold in the late light, and Adrian stood beside me in the doorway and watched me not be afraid of it. A year ago, he said, I hired a quiet, unremarkable woman to pretend to be my wife for a single season. You did, I said. She did it rather too well. He laughed, the unguarded one, the one strangers never heard, and we went in. That evening I sat at my father's desk and wrote the first letter I ever wrote as Rosalind, Duchess of Ensley, Mistress of Hertsmere in my own right. When I had finished it, I let the wax fall red on the fold, and took the seal from the ribbon at my wrist, where it had lived for 6 years, and pressed it into the wax, and lifted it, and there it was, sharp and whole and exactly itself, the seal that had outlived the theft and the silence and the false name. Saying the thing my father taught me it said when I was small enough to need both hands to hold it. I stand behind this. I had always meant to. It had only taken me 6 years, and a cold duke, and a contract I corrected, to find a thing worth standing behind that was not merely my own name, and to learn that the bravest seal a person can press is the one they set, in front of everyone, beside another's,